You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text and Glossa House TV. I'm Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, and today I have the great privilege of talking with the CEO of Canon Plus, Brian Kohl. Is it Dr. Brian Kohl? Brian Kohl? Like, just Brian?
No
Can I call
doctor.
you today?
No doctor. I've got a
All right.
master's degree, but don't call me Master Brian Kohl, please.
All right. So it's good to meet you, Brian, man. We talked just for a couple minutes before hitting record, so I'm looking forward to this. A couple of overlapping sort of things with us. We both have an interest in rhetoric and writing and teaching in the publishing world. So, yeah, I actually started using Canon Plus just last month, maybe. So that was
No
sort of
way. Way to go.
my introduction to that. I interviewed one of your authors, Joe Rigney, and
Oh, fantastic.
yeah, we were talking about his book, and so I got onto Canon Plus and was checking out his videos and those sorts of things. Boy, the Canon Plus platform, you guys have done a great job. It's really user friendly and it's aesthetically pleasing. Yeah. So you
No.
guys have done a great job with that. I called up my co-owner for Glossa House after I got onto Canon Plus. I was like, man, you got to see this. They've done a knockout job with this. So,
Well, we appreciate
yeah.
it. You know, publishing's really changed in the past few years, and I do feel like Canon Plus is sort of the way of the future. In the past, I live in Moscow, and Canon Press got big with Credenda Agenda magazine back in the day. And I do feel like Canon Plus is the next edition of bringing a lot of people on, joining the campaign, trying to become a lighthouse wherever you are and
Right.
bringing light to your community. And so that's really what Canon Plus is about. Also, we've got fun entertainment. So, we're trying to do a lot, but glad to hear you're enjoying it. And
Yeah.
I'll have to tell my designers you like the look of it. Although I try not to flatter the designers too much.
Yeah, it's nice. Like, it's just the aesthetic is good. I mean, it's beautiful, so you guys have done a really good job with that, and the layout's nice, and you guys have everything from cartoons to podcasts to interviews to like authors talking about their books to I don't know. Tell us a little bit about what's going on with Canon Plus for my viewers or listeners who
Yeah.
may not be yet familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned rhetoric, and I do feel like, ethos, pathos, and logos, the typical proofs of rhetoric, really do come together with publishing in a fascinating way. So, we really want something that's got, it obviously needs to have the truth in it, the logos, so the
Mm-hmm.
argumentation. It's also got to have character, which I think people miss out on. If you're going to listen to somebody as an authority, that ethos has to be there.
Mm.
And of course, the emotional aspect is something that I think Christians tend to they either go all in on emotion or they ignore it entirely. And
Right.
so a big part of our mission here is to try to be compelling. And we think Christ is the Lord of all, right? And
Yeah.
all of Christ for all of life means that we can have a show about making a kid's picture book. Uh, Exciting news I can announce to you is that we've got Tintin, the Adventures of Tintin show now
Nice.
streaming on Canon Plus, which I've
Nice.
got a bunch of little boys. So for me, that's sort of like, yes, we're doing the thing that
Awesome.
we wish. They're 30-minute episodes, great adaptations of the classic cartoons. And so that sort of is a quick explanation of what our goal is. Of course, our bread and butter is a lot of the weekly commentary. We
Right.
live in a weird time, you know. We live in a time where there's terrible things happening in our country. A
Yep.
lot of people feel like that the rug got pulled out, and we
Yeah.
really want to provide some leadership and some companionship as we're moving together. So really, Canon Plus is just a way for us all to get the soul food that we need to be able to face the challenges in this third decade of the 2000s. So
Yeah.
that's the quick overview.
That's great. Talking about feeling like we had the rug pulled out from under us. I mean, yeah, especially just in the last 5, 6, I don't know, maybe 10 years, but really just even the last several years. Like things have gone culturally to such extremes, right? That some people never could imagine, though those of us who know better know that this has been carefully orchestrated, and this has been planned for decades. If you just go back to the 80s, I was telling my college students yesterday, if you go back to the 80s and read, Kirk and Madsen's After the Ball, right? This is, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but if you go back and read that, they laid out a plan in 1980 or 81, I believe it was, um, for how to make America essentially LGB obsessed,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah,
they followed that to a T. I mean, everything that they said back in 1980, 1981, they've done to a T, and it's worked. This has all been carefully
yeah.
orchestrated. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one, but I do. One of our fun projects we worked on is, if you're familiar with Saul Alinsky, one of
yeah,
Obama's
right,
influential, radicals. He wrote Rules for Radicals, basically the playbook for polarizing an opinion you disagree with, isolating it, and making it heinous that no one can
right,
believe it, right? And then one of our projects we've done here is. Doug Wilson wrote Rules for Reformers, and that's kind of been our mission there of explaining how can someone who believes in Jesus still be wise and still build a community that can last, and something that is not just a bunch of isolated people saying, "Whoa, all of a sudden I can't trust what's on the news," but
right.
is instead surrounded by a community of believers that are building towards something and that has Christ, of course, at the center. And then you mentioned too, your readers got to listen to Joe Rigney, and
Yeah,
hearing him, I think that toolbox of emotional sabotage and the
yeah,
discussion of what it means to resist emotional sabotage and to understand when someone's manipulating you. Those
yes.
those are key tools, and I see that as an important step for a Christian publisher when the major Christian publishers in our space have failed to prepare or provide resources that people actually need.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, that's a good word. So I would encourage everybody who's watching or listening, go over and check out Canon Plus.
Yeah,
And then
joincanonplus.com. Go to
yeah,
joincanonplus.com. That's our spot.
lots of just great, clean, family-friendly entertainment, from books to audio to video. A lot going on there, and so I'm curious, and I'm trying to use my words carefully because if I use the E word in terms of the season that we're in, YouTube's been flagging a bunch of my videos saying that I'm, doing some illegal promotion of politics or something.
Political.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I'm curious though, just going to rhetoric. Did you watch the debate last night?
I've seen a little bit of reaction, but I missed out on this one. You should tell me what it was. I heard that the orange candidate. I like to think of it as a fair. So we're all at a local fair. We've got our local fair here, and we're trying to pick the best pig for the affair. And I and
Right.
I and I
That's right.
hear that Kamala
Yeah.
really handled that situation well and came out stronger than people were expecting she was going to.
That was the case for me as a viewer. I was expecting a complete ball drop on that side, although she's had a lot of time to prepare, and you could tell, a lot of it was just rehearsed answers on her behalf.
Yeah.
Uh, Nevertheless, I felt like she hung out a few bait clippings or whatever, and you know. The other candidate took them hook, line, and sinker, and ended up maybe looking a little frazzled or foolish at a few points. At least they got at a minimum, what her campaign got was a few sound bites to make him just look absolutely ridiculous going
Mhm.
forward. Um, so yeah, I think. I think his showing last night, just from a rhetorical standpoint, was less than flattering, less than elegant.
I guess
Yeah,
I got a question.
yeah,
Here's
go
a
ahead.
question for you.
Yeah,
You know, what do you think would be a win for him coming out of that? Because if I were to pick it, I don't think, I think on one level, the sort of JFK or sorry, RFK style earnestness, or
yeah,
perhaps you might describe it as elegance. I don't think that's ever been what
no,
he does and would
that's
never
right.
be what he'd shoot for a debate. So I guess what would he have done that improved his position, I guess?
Yeah, he seemed to cower, right? Like he hasn't really, and I saw a little of that in the previous one with the current sitting president, but he seemed to cower. For example, when they asked him the question about why bring race or ethnicity into this at all, the whole idea of like Indian her versus black her, and he just cowered. He's like, look, she can identify and be whatever she wants, I have no problem with that. Which
Yeah.
I feel like his constituents, if he had just said, well, clearly she's pandering to the black vote when she needs to, and clearly she's pandering to the Indian vote or, the other ethnicity when she needs to. I feel like that's what his constituents expected, but it's not at all what they got. To hear him say
Yeah.
she can identify or be whatever she wants, that was a little bit alarming, actually.
Yeah.
And it wasn't characteristic, rhetoric from him. So that's one thing. I think that was a weak spot, to see him sort of cower, and you know, and then just
I think
yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
here's a thought maybe. Enjoying watching this simply because clearly the play that's being run right now is his desire to try to win the middle, which are the people who watch those debates and are unsettled, right? And so it sounds to me like just as he did on some of the pro-life uh, uh, issues,
That's
and then
right.
similarly with some of those social policy issues, his campaign has identified this as a spot where he can drag in some of those middle voters by
Right.
perhaps not taking such a hard line. Whereas the rest of us who watched him stand up with blood streaking his face and, watched him and have enjoyed all of the cat and duck memes being eaten online, those of us who've watched free speech as an issue and consider it that way, we're not going to be swayed one way or the other on that
Yeah.
one. We're solid.
Right.
We're already locked in. So I'm wondering if that's an intentional policy decision. Again, I didn't watch that, so this is
Yeah.
just me guessing as what would he have come away from this looking for?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you're probably right about that, trying to pull in those middle constituents, but if anything, I think she might have come out with the upper hand in that regard. I mean, she
Yeah,
she was way more rhetorically polished than I
yeah,
would have.
shocking words to hear about someone who appeared to be unable to string two sentences together. So
Right. So it was, yeah. I mean, I think I texted somebody about 2/3 of the way through it, just hashtag clown show last night. That's how I felt about it. Like, it just was silly in a lot of ways to me. So yeah, the eating the cats and dogs, right? That's obviously going to be a clip that is going to come out of there. And there were times where, it felt like once again the moderators were leaning to the left and
oh sure, terribly.
lobbing softballs in that direction and that sort of thing. So um,
One
you
one
know,
one interesting point, I think I stole this from Matt Taibbi, but he was flagging the fact that free speech and censorship has still not been recognized as officially part of this campaign, right? So when we're in the debate, the question of free speech and who's being censored and who's able to say what is
that's
still
right.
not even granted as part of our conversation. Because obviously there's only one right answer on that. There's
Right.
only one side. This has become mainstream media versus the orange candidate,
Yeah.
and what feels like the everyman on a number of levels and across a number of different ethnicities. So that right there is a fascinating point. I think that's a giant omission for the debate platform that tells you kind of everything you need to know, even for middle. Of course, I don't know if you listened to RFK's resignation speech, but he flagged censorship as probably his number one thing that he dealt with, and
Yeah.
then moved into health.
Yeah,
And
for me, I mean, personally, from where I sit, I'm theological conservative, social political conservative, all that. Like for me, that probably is the thing I'm most concerned about. Would be freedom of speech, free speech. And obviously, the other stuff is very alarming. I mean, the human sexuality issues, all the gender stuff, and uh, but yeah, the free speech, that stuff's super concerning. It was fascinating to see last night when the issue of abortion came up, and he was talking about, well, this candidate's willing, and her running mate are willing to let abortion happen in month 7, 8, or 9, or even after the birth. And he's like, why? He's talking to the moderators. Why don't you ask her if that's true? Please ask her that question. And they're like, we got a lot of things to cover. We're changing the subject. Um,
it's embarrassing. If it weren't the people in control, it would be embarrassing.
right. So, the free speech stuff, and the stuff revolving around reproductive rights and human sexuality, all that's important. I'm curious. I mean, you've taught rhetoric, you've written on rhetoric. And I know you weren't able to watch the show, but just in general, like, given what's in sort of the culture and the ether right now, if you will, like, what do you say to students who are maybe studying rhetoric, or that this is
Yeah,
it's an interesting time to be alive and witnessing this, because both candidates, as you said, like, well, one of them certainly never been elegant, and well, I don't know if either of them have ever been elegant. Like,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, I'm just curious. What do you say to students maybe who are studying rhetoric?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and we one of the show that I'm co-host for, Stories of Soul Food podcast, with ND Wilson, spend a lot of time talking for kids and discussing, hey, what is your goal as an 18 to 22-year old trying to set up your life in a world that
Right.
feels like you don't have the controls that you used to have. And at the same time, the world would love to pacify and sedate you with
Yes.
whatever it offers. So one of those questions that we talk about a lot is just, um, I, yeah, the time for elegance is not now, but the time for
Mm,
energy and excitement and leaning in and trying things and being a kid who's interested. One of the first steps in being interesting is to be interested, and everybody can be interested. So again,
mm,
I keep bringing up the fair because we're a small town. We got the fair this week, right? The county fair. Go to the fair and watch the people. Watch the animals. We've got a huge variety of fascinating people, from the absolutely insane carnies who are running the
yeah,
rides, all the way up to the average people that share the town with you, and
yeah.
be an interested person. So my main advice for a rhetorician is that if you're sitting there and you're just kind of posing and thinking to yourself, how am I going to interest people? You are going to be. We make fun of Aristotle sometimes for being a pleated pants kind of thinker, as much as we're
Mm,
very grateful for Aristotle. But like, get off the pleated pants, go put on a pair of jeans and walk around. Like, so I
mm,
guess my first piece of advice would really just be advice for everybody, is that God gave us an amazing world. And if you go out and find pieces of it that are interesting, you will find ways to be interesting to folks, right? If you're interested, you find the
mm,
interestingness of it. Now, if you're specifically talking politics, man, the small town politics of building a community and being involved in your church and fighting tooth and nail for
yeah.
your town versus being distracted by how am I going to save Washington, D.C.? How am I going to drain the swamp? That's where generational impact happens. So, in your local schools, in your churches, I have a great group of guys that I went to school with that I'm still in touch with, and watching them around the country. Some of them still here, but all of us together building and having our own kids now. that's where you start to think, you know what? The Lord blesses the day of small beginnings, and He promises that.
Mm,
So our prayers had better be, as a high school kid or as a college kid, 18 to 22, if you got a small beginning, you better be telling the Lord, bossing the Lord, hey, you said you'd bless this small beginning. Get into it. Bless this. Here it is, seed in the ground.
mm,
And then what's scary is when the doors open, you got to actually go through. And I think that's where that's the hard part that comes. So,
wow, that's good. So you said you mentioned earlier you have 6 kids, yeah?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
5 boys and then finally got a girl right at the end. So,
Oh wow.
um,
Wow.
so
She's got
I feel
five
like a
five big
brand,
brothers.
yeah, no, it's pretty funny. She's either going to be a total tomboy or totally spoiled, or maybe both.
Yeah.
We'll have to. I do feel like I'm a new parent all over as I'm watching these things, and everybody's always like, "Oh yeah, girls are." No one ever says girls are exactly the same as boys. So yeah,
Right. Oh yeah, so it's good. I mean, it's interesting parenting in these times as well. I think, like one with just media like devices, right?
yeah,
That's not something. I don't know how old you are. I'm about to turn 44. But devices, we had like a Walkman, when I was a kid. That was about as fancy as we got. Although Home Alone came out with this voice recorder when I was a kid, you could kind of change your voice. That was pretty cool.
it's pretty cool.
Um,
Yeah,
but my I have three, and my oldest, she'll turn 18 this coming summer. But our second, our middle kid, he just started 10th grade, and he's got a phone, but it's kind of a dumb phone. So he's had like a little brick phone for a little while, and he started using like a smart dumb phone recently. Very very few apps
yep,
on it, that kind
yeah,
of
like the
thing.
Gab phone or Brick or
Yeah,
whatever that is.
pretty
Yeah,
much. Yeah, that kind of thing. And the access they have to just like technology that I could have never imagined when I was their age. The kind of uh, stuff with human sexuality going on that they're having to grow up with, and that I'm
yeah.
having me and my wife are having to explain to them that was not even a thing, really when I was their age. um it's a crazy world to be parenting in. um yeah, these days. I'm wondering, just as a parent, what are some of the trends that you're seeing, and that's another place I think where can something like Canon Plus comes in really handy. But what are some of the things that you're seeing culturally, as I guess from the perspective of a parent or any other perspective, but
Yeah.
that you're
Well,
having to wrestle with and confront? Yeah.
I'm gonna have to flip that back around on you because you're about my oldest is in sixth grade,
Okay.
so it sounds like I should
Okay.
be asking you for advice on that. So I'll jump back to that and find out how you're handling it in a moment. But
Yeah.
you're totally right. I do. One of the biggest feedback pieces that we do hear from Canon Plus is from parents saying like, yes, I can turn my kid loose on your app to watch or listen to any audiobook, stream any show. And that doesn't mean they're not going to hear stuff that is more mature, because we are
Right.
dealing with a culture that's whack. It does mean
Yes.
you're going to have to talk about the reality of abortion, the fact that in many states, a child who is born just with a failed abortion will be left to die
Right.
after they're born, right? So all those things are true. And they're not things that are going to be comfortable, but you're totally right that with my sons, I've had to talk to them about what a rainbow flag means,
Right.
what it means if a person thinks they're an animal, right? These are things that
Yeah.
they're not, that I never even knew about when I was a kid.
Yes.
And at the same time, our goal is to launch our children so they can succeed as they get older, not so that we shelter them so that they have no idea what's happening. Now, of
Right.
course, sheltering is part of launching, but as far as I'm concerned, I've had to have basic conversations about, yeah, there are some people in the world who are so sold out on their sin that they do believe God did not make them a man and that they're actually a woman. We've had to have those kind of conversations.
Right.
So
Right.
that's a kind of a quick way of asking that. I guess the tech question might be a question of use. Like, what are you able to use, or what does your son find most useful about having the phone? And I think that might answer some of those questions. But yeah, let me know how you're approaching it as someone who's a decade ahead of me.
Yeah, I appreciate the flip back there. So, yeah, I mean, for us, well, I'll say the number one thing, or one of the number one things, is absolutely 100% no social media. You know,
Mm.
uh, that
Yeah.
that has been all but banned. So our kids, as far as we know, unless they're doing something really slick, somewhere behind the scenes, they don't have any social media accounts. And that's been we've
What a
been
gift.
super,
What a
yeah,
gift you've given your
yeah,
kids, man. They're going
yeah.
to enter college able to get a device that they want without having 12 years of their most needy published on the internet already.
Yeah, I was sitting here at the college. I was sitting at lunch last week or the week before, and we had a chapel speaker, and actually the president of the college was speaking that day and talking about. We're going through, I think, Jonathan Haidt's book on Haidt's book on the anxious generation. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but he's talking about how social media has essentially created an anxious generation. And I was asking these college students, do y'all think that social media has caused you to have a different childhood than perhaps what I had? And they're like, oh, absolutely, it has. And I'm like, if you had a choice to go back and have phones and social media throughout your childhood and your teen years versus not have it, what would you do? And they all said, hands down, we would choose not to have phones and social media, which blew my mind to hear these college students like admit that. So then I asked them, like, well, my children don't have social media, and one just got essentially a first phone, and they're like, whatever you do, don't let them get social media. That's what these college students who are looking at their phones while they're talking to me, right, telling
Yep.
me, whatever you
Yep.
do, don't let them get social media. And
That right there is such a great test case for rhetoric. That you can have a mental knowledge of what you need and the emotional pull or of habit, the ethical pull right there of
right.
actually using your phone. That's persuasion in a nutshell, which is partly why we don't define rhetoric as changing someone's opinion, but
Hmm.
instead providing someone the information that they need to obligate belief functionally, right? Because you can't change their opinion. Those
Right.
kids
Of
have
course.
already kept, they still will use their phone more than they should.
Yes.
Um, I mean, what you were saying about anxiety is very true too. Little publishing insight. The subtitle for, or the title for Joe's book now, of course, is Leadership and Emotional Sabotage. Originally, it was Leadership in an Age of Anxiety, because
Hmm.
anxiety is sort of the atmosphere in which
Yeah.
emotional sabotage thrives. But yeah, you're totally right. Those things you just identified and picked on there are, it's the atmosphere, it's the gas in the room, which is the metaphor that gets used, that is just waiting for a match to go off.
Yeah. Something rhetorically, I've seen this rhetorical move being made, and it's one word that I keep seeing and hearing over and over, and I'm really curious. You're in Idaho, right?
Yes,
I,
sir. The
I'm
little
I'm
skinny
real
part of the top.
I'm really curious to see if you've picked up on this as a buzzword lately, but it's the word trauma. It seems like everywhere I'm looking, like every time I turn my head, I'm seeing and hearing the word trauma again. Are you noticing this?
Yeah, I mean, mostly it's going to be on the internet. I do feel like it's part and parcel of the victimization. If you
Right,
remove responsibility from yourself,
right.
then you don't actually need to take an action, which, well, functioning adult Christians do just as much. You say to yourself, hey, if my parents didn't quite raise me the way I was supposed to, then I don't actually have a responsibility to fix my self-control issue that I have right
Right.
now. And so, yeah, trauma is a nice neutral word that helps us get away from the fact that, yeah, the world comes with baggage, and you've got sin that you didn't necessarily sign up for. And if you
Yeah.
focus on that sin, it's a whole lot easier to ignore the sin that you actually did sign up for. So
That's right. Even in like, the biblical studies world that, I move in with all these Bible scholars. This is becoming now a burgeoning thing, a burgeoning field of study. Now we have you know, trauma in biblical studies, or trauma in theology. This is becoming a huge deal. So I am hearing a lot about like anxiety and angst, but trauma is forging ahead full steam, and I find that interesting. I think you've tapped into a large part of what's going on there with your comments. Um, so yeah, I
and
don't
I
know.
do
Yeah.
I do think trauma. If I just ran a quick engram viewer for trauma to see when it peaked, and it definitely is peaking in the past 20 years or so, or
Hmm.
late 90s to early thousands is when it really got. That's when, and I have a feeling that a lot as we come of age and start reading and thinking on it, a lot of those early recent scholarship are in the magazines and sort of in the culture of what we're doing, which is a big part too of why you want to make sure that if you're on social media, then the idea, hashtags like sharing your trauma or those kind of things, you got to make sure that you're feeding yourself with stuff that's good. um
Right.
or when it's like a well. Another thing I realized, especially when I taught rhetoric, I would sometimes find myself just realizing, wow, I'm out, I don't have anything else to say. And to
Yeah.
me, that was a sign that when you're going to a well and you're pulling stuff out of the well and the well runs empty, you better make sure that your intellectual, religious, and aesthetic life is filling that well, so that when you're reaching around for stuff, you're not grabbing the current, the word du jour, like trauma or like anxiety, or all the things that I don't know about because
Yeah.
I'm no longer cool. Actually, I don't think I ever was, but as far as like, I don't have that anymore. You want something deeper.
Right. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. It's interesting to see how quickly some of these words, come into vogue, and it's almost like just as quickly they're out.
Yeah.
Even I mean, especially like with hashtags, right? I guess they're kind of like created to do that. To come into vogue and then just fall out. Think of things like Me Too, right? That that was really big for a minute, and then nobody uses it anymore. Or you can make things trend, I guess, make terms trend. And it's pretty fascinating the how we as a society have come up with this idea to make a word or language trend and then fall out. Like I'm pretty interested in that kind of thing, right? Just like how it's a very sort of utilitarian use of language. Um and there, I mean, just rhetorically, language is doing way more than just communicating, right? It's doing something social, something political, something moral, ethical, theological. It's operating on all these different levels. But I do think I don't know, what do you think about that? Like how we've utilized language just to like capture a trend, and then boom, it's gone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great question. I think I've got a little bit more of a negative view of it than you have. I think it's actually much more practical. I think it's generally driven by marketing and solely, pretty soulless. So in the
Hmm.
situations that I'm thinking of, um, you should be aware that advertisers have the ability to target geographical sections, huge
Right.
sections as big as the US, and blast a particular feeling. So the idea of anxiety or the idea of feeling fearful is very helpful for election rhetoric, especially.
Hmm.
Just realized I wasn't supposed to say that, but I said it anyway.
That's all right.
But that comes down to marketing as well, and we've built a system of robots that are speaking to robots. And so I do think, as much as, yeah, I love language, I think if you actually want to jump back to the multi-layered approach of it, the current trending system is really robots talking to robots and an algorithm that is driven to incentivize engagement. And so there's only two things that people, I'm a literature guy. So the idea of the primal desires, you always want to make sure your character has the primal desire set up that makes sense, and that's where their flaw comes in, and they're trying to get something that's deep, right? Where we actually see depth is going to be in something like literature. That was kind of like Tolkien's quest for depth, is what Tom Shippey, I think an unbelieving scholar, but Tom Shippey identified depth as Tolkien's fundamental aspect. That's what he wanted.
Hmm.
He wanted to find layer upon layer of meaning. And that to me, so I guess I should say, I don't know that I see that happening with the way that we
Hmm.
use terms. Instead, I see them much more like keywords for marketing algorithms, whether
I
you are
see.
marketing particular candidates or marketing particular products or even just marketing for people's time. The best examples for that would be all the indications of reels or the short form videos. Vine was here and gone, but that's the same thing it's
Yeah.
shooting for. Is they want to find those primal things that people watch that either make you laugh or make you afraid, and then they'll find more of those and feed them. So that's my take
Hmm.
on it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Yeah, I think that's a good insight. Speaking of laughter, you juxtapose laughter versus being afraid. Um, yeah, I'm curious. So I started moving in sort of stand-up comedy world within the last, I don't know, 9, 10 months, and you're trying to get into that. I'm interested, in free speech in the comedy world too.
Okay.
And I've seen it's interesting to like watch comedians. They've been pushing back really hard against the idea of being canceled, or there for a little while, comedians were facing a lot of backlash, and then they sort of seemed to bond together somehow and uh, push back. And in a way, I feel like comedians have been on the front lines of free speech, like the sort of protecting free speech and a free speech movement, if you will. um, and I, as a pastor and somebody moving in that comedy world, I often see a lot of overlap between the two, where it's almost like comedians and preachers, good preachers, are like the last couple of frontiers of truth speaking in our culture, you know,
Uh,
and
yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Fascinating. Um, okay, I guess first off, can't really speak to comedy. You'll have to jump over to the Wade Show with Wade on Canon Plus. Have I mentioned
okay,
joincanonplus.com? Check
yeah,
out the
there you
Wade
go,
Show. Wade does political comedy and is very thoughtful about it, and then also very funny. So those are the two. Those are tough things to pull off together.
yeah,
Um, but I guess again, I'll just say what I think, and you can let anybody feel free to disagree and pick which one they agree with. I think that the comedians and the other artists are actually, front lines might be one word for it. I think they're I've heard them described as the canaries in the coal mine of culture.
mm,
So you're going to see trends hit in comedy first that are about to hit wide culture, and you're also going to see the new trends like the backlash, say, against the Zuckerberg censorship or the wave that
right,
Elon has read. So in one sense, I guess maybe that's true, but I think artists are far more reactive. And then what I would put is I'd put religion up higher on that list, and then downstream from religion we get culture. And then in culture, it's the sensitive ones. It's the artists that you're going to see doing the heinous things first, and you're going to see artists also. Hopefully, Lord willing, it's our mission here at Canon Plus is to have artists who are doing true good and beautiful stuff as well,
right,
and hopefully pushing back the other direction. So I don't think that like, as much as I appreciate Dave Chappelle stand for free speech, I don't think he's I don't think he's
mm,
actually on a leading edge. I think he's on a reactive edge, and I do appreciate he
mm,
had the ability to see that what was happening that if he said all along, I can make fun of whatever I want,
Yeah.
that he was at least true to that ability to realize, hey, someone's trying to shut me up, and I refuse to be shut up. Because plenty of other people say, I'm a total rebel, and then they fall in line with the
Right.
Ukraine flag. They fall in line with the trans movement, and all that other stuff that goes along. So too many rebels are not actually rebels. I'm interested in the actual rebels.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, what we've seen in Christianity, I mean, is a lot of pastors, a lot of preachers, they've just caved, right? Talk about like being reactive, right? They haven't been on the edge of anything, you know. Uh
Yes. Yeah, that's totally right.
and that's been pretty disheartening. And you know, for me, I've been inspired at times by well, somebody like Dave Chappelle, even though he isn't doing necessarily like beautiful things or even good things, he is speaking truth at sometimes, at certain points. Even if it
Definitely.
is a
Yep.
reactive edge. And I will say, as a preacher, there's something there's something there that is maybe compelling and inspiring. Like, man, this guy is he says he's a Muslim, but this guy is out here. At least he's speaking up. He's got this
Yeah.
platform, and he's taking a lot of heat for it. And
Right.
he's saying something, which is more than I can say for a lot of people who call themselves pastors or preachers.
Oh, yeah. Amen to that. I mean, when we're working through a movie and analyzing it, you're gonna get criticism on three levels that I like to talk about. You will get criticism in like a triangle of the true, good, and beautiful. And beautiful doesn't necessarily mean pretty. So I've seen a
Hmm.
few Chappelle skits that definitely are aesthetically well done, right?
Right.
So when a comedian has the audience on a line, like a fish on a line, and that line
Yeah.
never breaks, right? That's
Yes.
that's what beauty is for comedy,
That's good. I
right?
like
And
that.
then
I like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then timing too is the other part of that. So there are aesthetic factors. I'm not saying he needs to be like the Sistine Chapel in order to be good. I'm saying he needs to be good at what he does.
Right.
And then same thing for shows. Like as much as the truth of the God's Not Dead movie is, right? That's a true movie. I don't mind. I have fondness for the Newsboys that goes
Yeah.
deep, but that aspect of truth isn't enough to make up for the fact that it's aesthetically not well done.
Right.
And at the same time, it does make up for something. And then you also want to bring the audience into it. How does the audience feel after watching it? Do they feel
Mm.
compelled to stand up to the atheist professor in college? If so, then that could be effective. That's something that I do think is important. Something we do need to tell our kids is like, hey, if you hear somebody saying something stupid, you can say, I don't agree. And that sort of liberation, that liberation from herd instinct is something that Christians should feel more than any other people. And you're totally right. We've been sheep in the wrong sense for far too much of the past decades, century.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was watching the the conversation between Joe Rigney and what's Doug Wilson about the leadership stuff. And I
Yeah.
was noticing you guys filmed that in kind of like an abandoned building or a warehouse or something like
Yeah.
that, right? There's just stuff laying all around. And I was thinking like rhetorically what is going on there? Like with the scenery. Did they just happen to drop down and like here's a good place, but it didn't seem that accidental to me, right? So was the and this is just me asking you as an insider. I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
Maybe you know, maybe you don't. I don't know how much of a hand you had or didn't have in that the filming of that. But they're sort of filming. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about? Like the room
Totally.
they're
Yeah.
in?
So,
Yeah,
yeah, you're talking about our Everyman's Guide to Emotional Sabotage, and then we just dropped
that's right.
season 2 in a different spot, Institutional Sabotage, filmed in a skyscraper.
Okay.
But you're,
All right.
you're entirely right. Yeah, that location pick, Lord willing, that's the future home of Canon Press, and so there's a big meaning to that for us. For that space matters. Now, I think also there's and again, the question of how much does an artist know about the intention there, that's to play. But when I look at that, I see that as an atmosphere of anxiety and wreckage that
Right.
can be put in
That's what I was
place.
getting ready to go into.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think you picked up on it. That's an
yeah,
appropriate place for us to talk about fixing broken things.
yeah. I love that. So I was so I teach three sections of writing for this semester. I'm teaching three sections of writing in my Tuesday classes. I'm teaching my students to write jokes. So part of their assignment this semester is they have to do 3 minutes of original stand-up comedy jokes. Like that's that they got to do that. So they do it in increments. Like at week 8 they have to do 1 minute, and then a few weeks later 2 minutes, and then they're 3 minutes by the end. And then they're also so Tuesdays are joke writing labs essentially teaching them how to write jokes. And then Thursdays, essay writing labs. And essentially showing them like, look, these are the same thing, right? You have to know your content. You have to take a position, right? You have a voice, so on and so forth. Like wording, like precise wording matters. Like all of this like stuff that you're doing with jokes bleeds over into how you write an essay as well. And but one of the things that I've been talking with him about recently is like essentially uh, at the risk of saying where everything becomes nothing. Like I've been saying, like everything is rhetorical. Like
Oh,
every
totally.
situation, every situation is a rhetorical situation, and I keep coming back to rhetoric, like is deep and abiding interest of mine. But um from the way like I style my hair to what I happen to be wearing, like all of this is rhetorical in that it's sending some message that's attempting to force you to make a choice about me or persuade you of something about me. um, so I find that interesting, and just like now going back to that setting that you guys were filming in of this sort of wreckage. Yeah, everything is rhetorical. Do you agree with that? You disagree? I'm curious.
Yeah, definitely. I think it goes back to ethos. A big thing that we strive for in all of our creative efforts is subtext. So, we want to have something available that works on multiple levels. I teach also a little for grad students in the Camperdown NSA's Camperdown MFA writing program. So I spend a lot of time working with people's novels and talking about how do we
Mm,
get multiple layers of meaning in here, multiple actions, multiple motivations. Um, a scene in which people say exactly what they're thinking is a terrible scene. So as far as that's concerned, yeah, absolutely. Ethos, pathos, logos, available means of persuasion in any situation. The art of a good man speaking well. If we're grabbing from different definitions of rhetoric from Quintilian and Aristotle,
mm,
and the Ad Horennium, I can't remember exactly which one I'm grabbing from. Those ones right there, that's absolutely something you need to think about. And so the question of, am I a compelling person? Am I a person who motivates people?
yeah.
Is a tough question to ask. And
Yep.
I think what your students can hope for is that yes, I can be a compelling person when I write, my minute or 3 minutes of jokes on, I don't know, the county fair. You know,
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean that's such a like from a comedic standpoint, am I a compelling person? Am I an interesting person? Brilliant questions to ask, right? Because if you're not, like the audience will read that within the first 10 seconds, right? They will pick up on that and you're done. Like as soon as you lose them, I mean, the idea of winning an audience back, I mean, it's almost impossible. You can sometimes do it, but once that audience you've lost them, that's hard to get them back, man.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
That the ability to speak in front of a room of high school or college kids, you get to practice that all the time. Where you're like, oh, lost these kids,
Yep,
and I'm just lecturing, and they have to be here. So
that's
the
right.
bar is about as low as possible. But you're totally right. You can feel that go out of a room, and then with
Absolutely.
human creative endeavor, that's you know. I mean, fundamentally, and this is what we love to say in the Stories or Soul Food podcast, but this is one of Nate's lines I'm stealing. But the question is, does God like what you're doing? That's the ultimate standard.
Hmm.
And that goes from comedy all the way to novels, up to the way you create. You come home from work and your creative scene that you made, does God like it? That's the ultimate question. And if he likes it,
Hmm.
you've got an audience that matters, and there will be other people who do. Unfortunately,
Right.
for too many of us, I think that we set the bar a little bit lower than that. We set the bar at merely getting by.
Yeah.
And I don't know. The heroes in the Bible didn't seem to do a whole lot of merely getting by. So that's a bit of an
Right.
encouragement to myself sometimes of,
I went to a comedy show a couple weekends ago, and it was terrible. It was terrible. I wasted $28. I paid a ticket. It was absolutely terrible. The three comedians were awful. And I hate saying that because doing comedy is a hard stand-up comedy is a hard thing, but it was bad. And I guess there were maybe 50, maybe 60 max in this room, and across the night, for not for one comedian did the crowd laugh in unison once, right?
mm,
Which is pretty terrible, right? But you would hear these sort of disparate giggles or laughs, in this pocket and then in this pocket. And I was sitting there thinking, like, man, like these people who are laughing, because I don't know if I laughed. I don't know if I laughed that night. But these people who are laughing have set the bar really low. Like, like the bar, I'm not sure I've seen the bar this low. And if the bar is this low to do stand-up comedy, then I'm probably gonna be all right. Right. But man, it was a
here's
hard
a
night to sit through.
let me ask you another question. You mentioned that
Yeah.
you felt bad saying that they're bad. I guess my
Yeah.
question is, we have a totally different approach here and relish
Maybe.
the
Yeah.
badness. And I think that it creates a really, one thing I always try to say to new writers is like, if you get a bunch of red on that page, that is one of the best
Right.
things that can happen to you. And
Yeah.
getting absolutely savaged is, you have to enjoy it or you're quit. And so part of me is
That's
just
right.
like, if I read a book submission that just is embarrassingly bad, I know I've done it in the past. I'm not going to go nuke somebody who's trying to learn. But at the same time, I think there's an aspect of, hey, it's okay to enjoy how terrible certain
Yeah.
things can be, especially in the creative profession. And you're totally right.
Sure.
When the bar's so low, let's go ahead and blast away. And if you know, if, I don't necessarily mind it. So maybe you're just being nice because you don't want to nuke too much. But I say like, hey, enough of that. We're creating. We gotta be intense about this.
That's good. I mean, like certainly in comedy you got to embrace the suck, if you will. Like cuz you're
Totally.
going to bomb, you're going to fail, you're going to tell a joke and mess up the punch. You're going to tell a joke and it's going to be funny in your mind, but people aren't going to laugh with you, right? So all that's going to happen. What I'm really getting at is, right, these people who haven't put time into the craft, right? They come with a funny premise, but you can tell they haven't worked out a punch, right?
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, that's just lazy. That's just I just spent money that I worked hard for to come watch you be lazy at the craft. And so they'll come with funny premises that don't have punches to follow, and when they run out of those, they get a few giggles here and there. They just start doing the shock humor, and they'll just
Yep.
say the most vulgar things that they can think of, like really the most vulgar things. And people are not laughing then because it's funny. They seem to be laughing then because they're uncomfortable and they don't know what else to do. Or they feel so bad for you, right? That that's all they can do is just like to let out a giggle or something. Like it's weird, and like to me when I say that's terrible, like yeah, I mean that's sort of what I'm getting at. But personally, you know, getting over that fear of getting up on like a stage and trying to tell jokes, that's a hard fear to get over.
Mm.
And it's scaring the crap out of my students right now who have to get up in a
Oh
few
yeah.
weeks and tell original jokes. But I'm trying to tell them there's a you might know the author John Voorhouse. I'm not sure you've ever heard him, but he does a lot with character building and world building and this sort of stuff. But he talks about in comedy, stand-up comedy in particular, that all right, so let's say you have 10 jokes, right? If you invest your ego, like all 100% of your ego in one of those jokes and it bombs, then your whole ego, like your whole self is destroyed. But if you if you invest 10% of your ego in each of those jokes, well then it isn't merely as devastating when one of them doesn't work. And so I've taken a lot of heart in that. I think that's a really brilliant way to kind of think about that. But yeah, I
Let
don't
me
know.
let me
Yeah,
let me throw you our classic metaphor here instead
sure.
as another way to think about it. Creative endeavor is like baking, right? So you're trying to make something for these people in the audience. And instead of investing a piece of yourself in it, I think you should view it more at like, did I make these people the right, I don't know, maybe you're doing mixed drinks, right? Did I make them a decent gin and tonic or was it a terrible one?
Hmm.
And I think that's a
Hmm.
more positive way to think about it.
That's good. Yeah.
Or, change the metaphor to cookies. Did I make them? Did I make them a macadamia nut cookie that they wished was chocolate chip? Did I put M&Ms in a cookie that shouldn't have had M&Ms? Did I overcook? Did I overbake the cookie? Did I add
Right.
too much butter? Right? That kind of metaphor is the one I prefer, rather than the feeling of like, wow, people just hated part of me,
Sure.
which is
Sure.
honestly what a lot of MFA students feel as I'm
Hmm.
criticizing their novel and making
Right.
fun of their metaphors and talking about how bad their dialogue was. I want to be able to say to them, yeah, okay, so that was your first attempt at a burger and you gave me something terrible. It's like a charcoal biscuit on a piece of toast, right? So like try again, and this time try with real meat. Like that
Right.
doesn't hurt anybody's feelings. It's like, hey, we're creators, we're making things. Comedy, like you said, you pay $28 to go have this experience. They'd sure better give you something for the $28 and you can judge
Right.
whether you like it or not. And so I like that metaphor quite a bit. The idea
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
baking or making food or giving a gift to somebody. I think those that right there is a really positive way to think about creation, and it also
Hmm.
helps us feel like we're not we do a lot of content on Canon Plus. There's a ton of it.
Yeah.
We've got weekly shows, we've got our premiere releases, we have our documentaries. And sometimes when you spend a year making a project and you release it and everybody on your platform basically watched it in a week and a half, that could be a deflating
Hmm.
feeling
Right.
unless you're thinking about it like, no, we're feeding people. We're creating stuff that matters. And then people come in later can watch it later. But I don't need to feel like, yeah, every week when I put a piece of myself into the weekly show and people consume it in 5 minutes and move on. Like that to me is not an indictment on me, although it could be, I guess. But instead it's just that's we're feeding people. That's what people need
Right.
to grow, you know? And I do think moms actually have that feeling as well, as they do feed kids three
Hmm.
days a week, 365 days a year. And the kids are just like, thanks, mom, chomp, and they run
Right.
outside. Like that right there is something that's much more valuable than the amount of time that it takes. So
Hmm.
there's my
Yeah.
change of metaphor.
No, I like that. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'll definitely chew on that. To stick with the food metaphor, I'll chew on that a little bit
See,
and think
that's
about that.
comedy, right? That's comedy.
So
I'm terrified that if I were to ever try to do anything like comedy, I would just be Michael Scott in the stand up. That like I don't think I would
Gee.
be exactly that. So that's my greatest fear is that yeah,
Uh,
stand up. I would not have that ability. So
Yeah, it's an interesting art form, man. It really is. Yeah. So, well, man, I appreciate you meeting Brian. It's great to talk with you and pick your brain and yeah, to have you push back and to argue and give some insight and some metaphors and all that. As we go here, tell people where they can find you and keep up with you, and then anything else you'd like to point them to.
yeah, appreciate that for sure. Well, if I haven't sold it well enough, join canonplus.com. That's where I want you to go. There's a free trial. You can test it out and see if we are in fact serving I don't know, watery apple juice instead of a nice G&T. But you can give that
Mm.
join canonplus.com, sign up for our free trial, test it out and give us some thoughts. We're both we're Christians who take it seriously, and it's great to talk to someone else who's creative. And I look forward to seeing your show, your first comedy show, sent to me
Well,
shortly. You know,
yeah.
at least your stand up here. That's what I think. I'm hearing that's the next barrier that I need to hear from you. So
Yeah, so my I've done a couple shows already. I got a my first big one coming up here in October. So I'm looking forward to that. A little nervous about it, but
that's great, dude.
we'll
I can't
see.
wait for the link. We can criticize it together. That'll be amazing. All right.
Yeah, appreciate that, brother. Well, man, thanks for meeting and carving out some time. I know you're a busy man, so yeah. If I can ever do anything for you, brother, let me know. But for those of you watching, head over and check out Canon Plus, and subscribe to that. And after you do that, head over to glossahouse.com and check out some of the stuff we got there too. Always releasing new podcast episodes every day, new books with audio, video companions a lot of times. So yeah, go check that out. But we're gonna wrap up here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And yeah, we'll stop here and say we hope that helps.
Thanks a ton for having me.
Yep.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.